Why has marriage become so difficult these days? The main reason is that our idea of marriage has changed. We are now looking at marriage not in the traditional sense, we are looking at it as a contract. Of course, the traditional view of marriage had its own limitations, but the issue is that we are now considering marriage, when you enter into a marriage, is that you're entering into a contract. You are actually signing a certificate, and I think that's why many people feel that you are signing a contract. But that view of marriage, and it's mostly a modern Western view, has had a lot of casualties. And we have seen a lot of rising divorce cases, separations, the order of the day. We're going to look at the contemporary view of marriage and a key solution, which is the kingdom view of marriage. Welcome to Heart of a Wife. My name is Caroline Kinyolusi. I am a mother, a wife of 20 years, a life coach, and a public relations professional. I have a keen interest in seeing marriages thrive. God is the one who originated marriage. His view was that the two are going to become one. In Genesis 2:24, the Bible tells us that the two shall become one flesh. They shall cling to one another, in other words. So they become one, of course expressed in form of a male and a female. So it is God who initiated it, and that is why it becomes a covenant. It is the only kind of arrangement that has the capacity to sustain what marriage is supposed to carry. It's supposed to produce children, destiny. It has a long-term responsibility. It's not just something you wake up and leave. For example, if you have children, it's not something you're going to wake up and say, I'm tired of these children. No, even the law does not allow that, because even the law is based on the natural law. And that's what makes marriage such a special relationship. That is very different from a contract, because now as a contract you enter because you have certain interests, certain needs you want met, and you basically enter a contract with the idea that you're going to get something. But a covenant, you enter a covenant that you're going to give, not to get. That is the difference. Another very key difference is that a covenant produces one being, one person, but expressed as a male and a female. And that is the opposite. A contract, they're two separate entities. And that is why you saw in traditional marriages, of course, many of them had aspects of covenant marriage, that you find, the wife taking on the husband's name. So they have one identity. That was the purpose. It was symbolic that we have become one. But in a contract, there's nothing like that. You retain your own names, and that is it. You live as separate individuals. And that is what makes a contract so fragile, so delicate. You can't just wake up and break it if you feel your interests are not being met. And we've talked about the fact that a covenant is something that you enter with the intention to give. Jesus Christ taught us very well that a man is supposed to love his wife, and that love is sacrificial. It is mirrored after Jesus Christ himself. So that kind of sacrificial giving is not something you do in a contract. A contract is not sacrificial. You basically give what you agreed on. But a covenant, you enter with the intention of giving everything, even laying down your own life. And of course, that is why women are called upon to respect and honor their husbands. That kind of sacrifice is so immense. The thing about a covenant is that you are there for the long haul. You are there. You stay faithful, you stay responsible, you endure regardless. And that is why God tells us to be very careful about who you become yoked with. And for believers, we are told do not be unequally yoked with non-believers, because God knows that marriage will not survive. But you see, in a contract, the issue is about terms and conditions, what we wrote down. Of course, when you're getting married, even when you go to the Attorney General, there is no place that you're going to sign terms and conditions. There are no terms and conditions. But again, people are taking it as if we have terms and conditions, such that you say, oh, he was supposed to provide this, he was supposed to do that, she was supposed to do this, she didn't do it, so I'm exiting. So there's a bit of a confusion. So we have talked about sacrifice in a covenant. A covenant is about sacrifice. When you enter a covenant, and godly things usually are covenant-like. You enter there to give sacrificially. It's about sacrificing because you understand what God wants. You are aligned with God's will. But of course, in a contract, you're not there to sacrifice. Why should you sacrifice? You will give what you want to give or what you agreed on. And if you don't get it, you leave. That is the main difference. But a lot of times these days, we're entering marriage, we don't want to sacrifice. You want to have your cake and to eat it, so to speak. And that is why it is becoming really, really difficult for people to stay married. Because if you have two takers, you cannot stay. And that is why you're seeing the younger generation, especially millennials and below. You'll find that people are saying who is supposed to do the chores, who is supposed to do this. Because right now we are competing. Yeah, we are attempting to compete. If you are there to give sacrificially, a man should not have a problem with washing dishes because that is his family, that is his household. However, he may not be the most gifted if he's not, God has given us different talents, different gifts. And a woman was gifted actually to manage the household. However, it is not her entire responsibility. She came to help. And so that is why when you're entering a marriage with the intent to give, you don't even struggle. Why would one person struggle with chores, struggle with rent, struggle with bills, and the other one is just keeping their money? It means that they didn't enter that marriage as a covenant. They entered it as a contract. You're having people trying to have terms and conditions, and marriage is too complex. It is too heavy to be able to be sustained by a contract. And as we close, marriage is for a lifetime. It is not when the contract ends. And that is where we're having trouble. It is important that we consider our view of marriage if we are going to survive.